What happens when you fuse raw power, blistering hand speed into a stance switching offensive tornado? You get Chingiz Allazov, one of the best kickboxers to ever do it. By the end of this video, you'll understand how Chingiz used stance switching to elevate his game. But before we break down the Alazov magic, we need to understand what stance switching is and why it has become such a big part of the modern striking game. So what is a stance? In sports, a stance refers to the way an athlete positions their body, specifically their feet and posture, to prepare for movement and action. Take tennis for example, where being square allows a player to move laterally more effectively. When we first walk into a martial arts dojo or boxing gym, we are taught to adopt a fighting stance. This is day one stuff and it's the foundations you build your style around. The fighting stance is a specific body posture and footwork pattern with the aim to optimise the fighter's attack and defence. Its core principle is to maintain balance. If your feet are square and somebody pushes you, you're likely to go backwards over your heels. By stepping one leg back and adopting the fighting stance, you can better distribute your weight and push into the back foot to hold your ground. With the addition of being slightly side on in stance, you make yourself a harder target to hit, as there's less to aim at. Well, so why do we have two stances? Well, the most fundamental reason for the existence of two stances is handedness. Approximately 90% of the population is right-handed, making the orthodox stance, left foot forward, right hand back, the natural choice for most fighters. This positioning places the stronger hand in the rear, allowing for more powerful strikes from that side, while the lead hand controls range and can set up combinations. This is the dominant hand strategy taught by the majority, although there are cases in boxing with the dominant hand being in the lead, Oscar De La Hoya being a very famous example. De La Hoya was a natural left-hander who fought orthodox, with the idea being he's going to have a better jab and a better lead hook, but I digress. It has been theorised that the term southpaw originated from baseball. In the past, before lighting systems were invented, ballparks were often oriented so that their batter faced west to avoid the setting sun. This meant the left-handed pitcher's throwing arm would be on the south side of the field, leading to the term southpaw, but it's been cited to have been used in boxing before baseball adopted the term. There have been many left-handed world champions fighting out of a southpaw stance, but historically southpaws weren't treated like strategic innovators. They were treated more like an inconvenience, an awkward glitch in the rhythm of conventional fighting. In Western boxing, southpaws were often stigmatised. Left-handers weren't just rare, they were unwelcome. In fact, being left-hand dominant was often seen as a curse. Trainers frequently forced naturally left-handed fighters to adopt an orthodox stance from a young age for nothing more than convenience. Southpaws were seen as awkward, unpredictable, and hard to train against. Their style forced opponents to adapt, and most fighters and their trainers didn't want to have to do this. The awkwardness came from the very geometry of the fight. Jabs collide head-on, neutralising one of boxing's most important weapons. The lead foot positioning becomes a little bit awkward, often resulting in accidental toe stepping and tangled footwork. Angles that are natural in orthodox versus orthodox matchups become unnatural and confusing in southpaw matchups. Basically, southpaws can create some chaos. This clash of stances often led to ugly, disjointed fights. Low action, bad positioning, lots of clinching. In short, boring affairs that left promoters and spectators unsatisfied. And it wasn't just a matter of style, it was political. At a time when promoters and organised crime held sway over matchmaking, southpaws were frequently avoided. They were hard to prepare for, harder to market, and risky to face. Why throw your rising star into a stylistic minefield when there were safer, more straightforward matchups available? In fact, I believe there wasn't a single southpaw champion in boxing throughout the whole of the 1950s. Add to that the simple reality that the left-handers are a minority, and you have a self-perpetuating loop. Fighters rarely face southpaws, so they didn't learn how to deal with them, and since they didn't know how to deal with them, they avoided them, and if they ever did face them, it was a stinky matchup. This scarcity made elite southpaws even more dangerous and even more ostracised. This is starting to sound like the plot of Inception. So if southpaws were considered awkward, switch hitting wasn't something that entered the thoughts of boxing trainers in decades gone by. Cus D'Amato and Angelo Dundee, trainers of Mike Tyson and Muhammad Ali, were firm believers in having a consistent stance, considering changing stance a risky endeavour that could expose vulnerabilities, and Tyson has said Cus would be annoyed with him if he changed stance mid-fight, even if done successfully. The philosophy was to master one stance and develop a deep expertise in a particular set of techniques and strategies. But of course, times have changed. There have been southpaw champions throughout the years that have been huge fan favourites, and then you've had switch hitters like Marvin Hagler, Andre Ward and Terence Crawford, who There are examples of elite world-class boxers who would switch hit effectively and change stances throughout a fight. As combat sports evolved, and especially with the rise of mixed martial arts and modern kickboxing, stance switching has become more accepted not just as a defensive tactic, but as an offensive weapon. It has become the norm in the modern game. What was once awkward is now elite level strategy, especially when a fighter can fluidly switch between both stances mid-combination, and there aren't many better examples than Chingiz Allazov. So after that potentially tedious lecture on the history of the stance, let's break down the smooth moves of Chingiz. We'll start with the basic principles before dissecting the layers of Chingiz' game. Stance switch fundamentals. The basic stance switch involves stepping the lead leg back to create more power in the rear side. By increasing the distance the kick or punch travels, the motion builds momentum, resulting in a more forceful strike. In the orthodox vs orthodox matchup, switching stance can expose the opponent's open side, allowing for more powerful attacks, and hitting to the body can target the liver more easily. Chingiz frequently uses his left kick to disguise and aid the switch. He'll throw a left kick to the leg or body, and then use this to step back into southpaw, where he can launch a more powerful kick or knee to the head as his opponent moves in. Jonathan Haggerty uses a similar strategy to set up his power team. However, Alazov elevates this concept by using stance switches not only for power, but for lateral movement, creating new angles of attack rather than just advancing or returning in straight lines. This is something we're going to get more into in the breakdown. Turning a fighter is a simple principle of changing direction to create a new angle. This can obviously be done to create a new angle of attack, but it can also be done to reset the position and alleviate pressure. With the fighter not feeling like it's a good time to exchange, it might be a good time to step off. The switch can be combined with lateral movement to take away certain weapons of the opponent, like moving to the right and away from an orthodox opponent's power side attacks. If you are moving away from an attack, you are creating more distance from it and will naturally be taking some of the sting and power away from it by moving in the direction it's travelling. Chingiz uses stance switches for all of the above, both offensive and defensive purposes, but as he's such an offensive-minded fighter, he is usually looking to create an angle for attack. Let's look at some examples of Chingiz' stance switching genius. Here we see Chingiz versus former glory champion Sitachai. Chingiz initially throws a left hook lead, but Sitachai intercepts him with a teep. The first attempt is ineffective as Chingiz remains squared up. However, Chingiz adjusts, throwing another left hook lead while shuffling into southpaw. As Chingiz is throwing the hook, Sitachai is simultaneously landing a low kick. This turns into an opening for Chingiz' right hook. Both fighters pivot and Chingiz quickly returns to orthodox, making the stance switch momentary yet effective in creating an offensive opportunity. Here we see Chingiz against the tall and dangerous Sami Sana. Sana applies pressure to Chingiz, backing him toward the cage wall. Chingiz steps back into southpaw to create some space, and as he does, he attains outside foot position. This is a key element in the southpaw vs orthodox battle. He throws a left hook, this time from southpaw stance, and he drags his feet across in the same way as he did against Sitachai. He now has a major positional advantage over Sana, who has to turn 45 degrees to face Chingiz before he can attack. As Sana turns and attempts to open up with some punches, Chingiz is already throwing the left high kick, which is his trademark weapon, and Sana simply doesn't see it coming. The kick lands flush, severely compromising Sana, which led to the finish moments later.
Smack the taste out of his mouth with that one. Uppercut. Back goes Sana. He's hurt. Sana's hurt. He's ready to go. Sana's ready to go. Alazov opens up like a house on fire. Oh, the body shot crumples him. He's done. That's it. He's done just like that. We've got 2 knockouts in the first round.
He did. Yeah, he did. No more. Back and that was it. But
in this example, we see Chingiz versus Marek Grigorian. With his back to the ropes, Chingiz switches to southpaw and throws a left hand down the middle, simultaneously taking his head off the centre line and disguising a pivot. Initially facing Grigorian head on, the stance switch shifts Chingiz from the 6 o'clock position to the 8 o'clock, while turning Grigorian to 2 o'clock. Grigorian in orthodox is forced to turn and advance to close the gap, but Chingiz is a step ahead, walking him into a perfectly timed left knee to the head as he steps in. This is a sequence you'll see absolutely rinsed throughout the bout, with the left knee aimed at splitting the watertight guard of Marek Grigorian.
It's difficult to find training partners that can mimic this kind of style.
Here we see the simple pivot. The pivot can be one of the best strategies to prevent a fighter from an easy counter. Turning with the punch takes Chingiz out of the firing line, and again he uses multiple times throughout his bout with Marek Grigorian. By moving around in a circle in this manner, he can avoid himself getting pushed back towards the ropes, particularly staying out of the corners. A kick into punch is a great skill to have in the locker. Here we see Chingiz throw a left kick and immediately throw a left hand as he steps back. By bringing his left leg back in this way, he creates a lot of leverage in the left hand, and he stings Natawut badly as he steps in to counter the kick. It's a crafty move that gives the opponent a false sense of distance. Natawut thought Chingiz would be closer than he was had he not used his switch hitting technique. Even though the examples against Sana and Grigorian involve retreating, Chingiz' movement remains offensive minded. He's utilising lateral movement, a rarity in kickboxing which often features the straight line approaches of Thai and Dutch style fighters. Moving in this way and creating these angles is a gap in the sport that Chingiz has been able to exploit. Defensive principles. Defence can be put into categories of physical and non-physical, as well as techniques used with the goal to create counter opportunities and those purely used to defend and not get hit. As boxing is the art of hit and not get hit, defence is 50% of fighting. The most common form of defence in kickboxing is the block, which protects the fighter while keeping them in position to counter. As explored in the pro striking breakdowns of the Dutch and Japanese kickboxing styles, this approach is heavily influenced by karate roots, with an emphasis on conditioning and absorbing strikes behind a high guard. However, Chingiz' use of stance switching challenges this traditional reliance on blocking and damage absorption. Whilst he will block while necessary, acknowledging it as a fundamental defensive tool, his real focus lies elsewhere. Chingiz aims to become elusive, a ghost in the ring, using movement and unpredictability to break free from the conventional kickboxing mold. In this fight with elite pressure puncher Marat Grigorian, footwork was the key to victory, and the stance switches aided him in not being there for the counter. Here we see Grigorian step across to cut Chingiz off from circling back to centre ring. Marat wants to be directly in front of Chingiz, glove to glove, where he is happy to force exchanges and he can get off his best work. Grigorian has an attritional strategy. He wears opponents down with relentless pressure. Chingiz knew he couldn't stand directly in front of him for 5 rounds. From orthodox stance, Chingiz throws out a jab to blind Grigorian. It keeps his guard occupied. He then uses a left low kick to step back into southpaw. This creates more distance from the right side of Marat and puts Chingiz on a more advantageous angle. As Marat steps in, Chingiz teeps, halting Grigorian's pressure. He then times a left knee to intercept him as he steps in once again. This is very offensive stuff, but Chingiz is still thinking about his exits. He knows he needs to get off the ropes. As he trades, he throws a left cross from southpaw into a right hook, which he uses to drift the cross back into orthodox. The hook gives him the movement needed to slide his feet, pushing off of Marat with the punch for leverage to exit out the side door. He scored his work, and as Grigorian is so tough and persistent, he knows he can't stay and have exchanges that aren't on his terms, but he can count on Marat to reliably step in, and he uses that to his advantage by timing his footwork. Here we see a similar sequence with Chingiz timing a left knee from southpaw as Marat shells up behind a high guard. He then throws a right hook to pivot around Grigorian, only this time he stays in southpaw stance. Chingiz exiting to his right is the closed side of Grigorian's stance. By throwing the right hook at his left hand, he's dealing with the side he's moving towards, and with Grigorian using a high guard, his peripheral vision is obscured by his own glove in the direction Chingiz is moving. Grigorian must turn and reset before he's able to attack. The ring, also known as the squared circle, is the ideal arena for a pressure fighter. It allows fighters to trap and corner their opponents. If you can push a fighter to the corner post, you can pin them there, and they can no longer move backwards, they can't exit laterally to the left or right, so you're greatly reducing their options. Chingiz' awareness of his position and kept him out of trouble on so many occasions in this contest. He planned his defensive manoeuvres ahead of time, and when you combine that with his lateral movement and stance switching, he was a difficult man to pin down. Here we see Chingiz slam left kicks from southpaw into the arms of Grigorian, who's hiding behind his high guard. Grigorian, being the conditioned fighter that he is, seems unfazed, and after a quick reset of the feet shows intent to throw hands. As he steps in, Chingiz drops back into orthodox to create space. As he approaches the ropes, he knows he can't use this tactic again without being pinned. Grigorian is in hot pursuit. In an instant, he slides his feet around and switches to southpaw, bringing him away from the right kick of Grigorian, and he lowers his posture to get down behind his guard. He presses into smother, which causes Grigorian to get on top of himself, needing to adjust his stance before he can do anything. Chingiz fires off a quick 2 punches before exiting out the side door and sending Grigorian crashing into the ropes, swinging at air. Chingiz is a highly physical fighter, constantly working to off-balance opponents. This serves 2 purposes: disrupting the opponent's ability to attack effectively and creating openings for his own offence. These were very important tactics against a man as dangerous as Marat Grigorian. Chingiz combines shifting footwork with physical frames and pushes to jam his counters. His techniques of punching while shifting not only nullifies the potential counters, but it also conceals his movement. Chingiz has strategies when fighting out of both stances. He has the fundamentals down, which is what allows him to transition so freely between the 2 stances, which can potentially have two completely different sets of strategy and techniques. The beauty of Chingiz's game is he doesn't have to think when doing so. He's proficient from both sides. Against elite Thai Superbon, we saw Chingiz reach his full potential. Chingiz executed a Superman punch using its momentum to drive Superbon into the fence. As Superbon jabbed to recover, Chingiz timed an overhand, though it was initially jammed. Moments later, Superbon attempts another jab whilst pivoting to his left, but he's unknowingly stepping into the same overhand that previously missed, this time with it landing clean. The sequence demonstrates elite fight IQ. Rather than cutting Superbon off immediately, Chingiz allowed the exit, letting Superbon move to his left, baiting him into the right hand. This is a great example of why it's so dangerous to move towards an opponent's power side, especially when back to the ropes or cage wall. But the best was yet to come in this bout. The final combination was a masterclass in switch hitting, with Chingiz in full flow state, seamlessly transitioning between southpaw and orthodox as if they were one unified stance. It was a perfect demonstration of what happens when power meets precision and when stance switching is executed with purpose, intent and method. Chingiz isn't a jack of all trades, master of none. He's an elite fighter in both stances, and this is so important when it comes to stance switching. Cons to the switch. Distance from the opponent is key when it comes to switching stance. If it is done at the wrong time, a fighter can leave themselves in a worse situation than if they'd just stayed in the original stance. Here we see Chingiz being backed into a corner whilst in southpaw. His exiting angles become further reduced the more he backs up into the corner. Grigorian then has free rein to throw a right-sided attack into the open side of Chingiz's stance. Had Chingiz just remained in orthodox, he'd have been better off. In this next example, Chingiz is once again backed into a corner as a southpaw. He throws an inside leg kick which off-balances Grigorian, and then he uses his momentum to pivot around. He's pivoting thinking about his exit. As he pivots, he drops his right foot back into orthodox, but the angle doesn't leave enough room between Grigorian and the ropes behind him. He can't exit scot-free. Grigorian clubs him with a 2-3 with the 3 splitting the guard. Again, switching stance probably wasn't the best option in this scenario. This is why Chingiz had to combine stance switching and lateral footwork with defensive techniques like dipping, smothering and clinch tie-ups. Sometimes he had to smother the action and stall, and sometimes he had to actively evade incoming strikes. He had to combine those defensive techniques. The stance switching itself wasn't enough. Chingiz's ability to blend footwork, stance switching and striking makes him one of the most dynamic fighters in modern kickboxing. He's a joy to watch. Switch hitting is a high level striking skill that when mastered can elevate a fighter's game dramatically. However, the skill is a double-edged sword. Without a solid foundation in both stances, the risks can outweigh the benefits. Alazov's success highlights how when executed with precision and purpose, switch hitting can be a powerful tool, but it also serves as a reminder that the margin for error is slim. If you want to add switch hitting to your own game, Pro Striking recommends spending a lot of time training in both stances. As always, thank you for watching the video. If you'd like more in-depth tutorials, explanations and breakdowns, head over to the Pro Striking Patreon. The link is in the description. We also have plenty of kickboxing breakdowns on the Pro Striking YouTube channel. And if you want to learn how to best use a jab from southpaw, go check out the Pro Striking breakdown on Tenshin Nasukawa. Pro Striking appreciates you more than a Chingiz Allazov switch hitting combination.